Dear friends, it's good to be back with you. Before we start the Dharma talk, Leslie, could I ask you to unmute yourself and just to invite the sound of the bell for us, and perhaps do the same at the end?
Very happy to do that, Murray.
Thank you.
Let me.
So, dear friends, Zen and the art of healing the planet. Um, I'm not going to talk very much about climate change and the environmental crisis that we all know that we face, but I want to focus more on what underlies those changes. Of course, Buddhism started 2,500 years ago, and it's interesting to explore whether it has anything useful to say about the issues that we face. So I'm certainly going to look at that. I'd like to talk about how we can support ourselves as we face the changes that we all need to make. And I'm also going to talk about some of the things that are already changing for the better. We live in a time of great environmental challenge. We've got extremely rapid changes in the climate happening. Yesterday in Cambridge, the temperature was around 20 degrees centigrade, which at the end of October is ridiculously high. And it's also causing other changes. We're seeing rising sea level and destruction of habitats that's leading to extinction of many species on Earth. These changes are causing suffering to living beings and to the Earth. And of course, we are part of the Earth. We are living on the Earth. And so it's actually causing us to suffer as well. In some cases, it's causing physical suffering for people whose lives are already being affected dramatically by climate change, with rising sea levels and degradation of the environment. And for many of us who've not yet been affected, but who fear for the future and feel helpless, it's resulting in anxiety, depression, and anger. It's affecting our mental health. So if we look at this from a Buddhist perspective, the first teaching that the Buddha gave after his enlightenment was the Four Noble Truths. And if we look at what I've already said, we could see that suffering exists. And this is the first noble truth. So let's explore what Buddhism says that we can do about that suffering. The second noble truth says that before suffering can come to an end, we have to recognize the cause of the suffering. This is something I've been thinking about a lot over the last months. And it seems to me that the driver for much of the global problem is the idea that we can find happiness in something external. That new clothes, a new phone, a new car, a new house can solve our problems and bring us happiness. And of course, that's what our Western minds have been conditioned to believe. Governments push this idea. We're hearing a lot about the need to grow the economy at the moment. And that will boost gross domestic product. Many businesses push this idea because it helps them to make money. If we consume more, then businesses are going to make more money. But of course, consumption in this way only provides a temporary anesthetic for lack of happiness. The seed of happiness already exists in our store consciousness. And it's actually our actions that can water this seed and help it to grow. Not our new possessions. They only provide a temporary blip of happiness, and then it disappears again. And then we have to buy more, consume more. In our rush to exploit the land and other species to produce more products to buy, we've become disconnected from the earth. We've ignored the finite resources of the earth. And we all have to see our part in this problem, not just to blame others or to wait for governments to change the situation and to solve climate change for us. So this all sounds pretty gloomy. But fortunately, the third noble truth says that suffering can come to an end. If we can transform our personal suffering and become calm and peaceful, we'll become happier and more effective in what we do. We have to recognize the deep fear and the sense of helplessness that goes with this global problem. And these are the things that underlie our anxiety, our depression, our anger, our poor mental health. So suffering can come to an end. It will take time, particularly for people who are affected physically by the changes that we're seeing, for those changes to be reversed. But we have to start. The longest journey starts with a single step. So, what is the way out of suffering? Well, the fourth noble truth says that there is a way out of suffering, and that the way out of suffering is following the Noble Eightfold Path. Now, I'm not going to go through another long list of Buddhist principles, but the first step on that path is right view. Our meditation practice of stopping, samatha practice, and deep looking, vipassana, help us to move closer to right view. And right view helps us to see the interbeing nature of all that is, and to touch non-duality. We tend to think that we exist as separate beings, and that's not true. Nothing exists in isolation. The flower contains the seed, the sunshine, the rain, the earth, and the gardener. Right view connects us with that reality, and it helps us to recognize and to transform our separation from the earth. The earth has the virtues of a bodhisattva: perseverance, infinite creativity, and non-discrimination. Things that we all love and admire. And we can aspire to those qualities as well. And if we truly love the earth, that is what we will do. We will do everything to care for the earth, and then the earth will be able to continue to care for us. So, what can we do practically about the problems we face? Well, Thich Nhat Hahn said that the cause of the problems is lack of mindfulness. And so, of course, the answer to the problems must be mindfulness. Tai always says he only taught one thing throughout his life. That thing was mindfulness. So, what can we do? Well, we all have a global footprint. Even the Buddha had a global footprint. He needed food, clothing, and shelter. And these things all come at a cost to the earth. The Buddha realized that he can minimize the cost of those things to the earth by living simply and in a way that was sustainable. And he did that by learning to distinguish between what he wanted and what he needed. And that's something that we also need to learn to distinguish. We live in a culture that encourages us to want a lot, to want too much. We need to go back to taking just what we need. We need to ask ourselves, do we really need a new phone or a new jacket? Or is that just something we want? If we do need a new jacket or a new phone, how can we recycle our old ones? I have a friend who says that she's recently realized that it's not possible to throw anything away because there is no a way to throw anything. It will remain on the earth and it will have an effect on the environment. And if we try and destroy it, we may create pollution that causes worse damage to the earth. So, we can look at what we consume. We can also look at the way in which we are exploiting the resources that the earth gives us in terms of how we travel. I personally am trying to drive less. I'm cycling and walking more when I can. I try to minimize flying. If it's possible to go somewhere by train, I went to Plum Village last summer by train instead of flying. And that reduces the impact, reduces the amount of carbon dioxide that's being put into the atmosphere. As individuals, we'll all need to find a balance. Our society has been developed in a way over the last 50 years that makes running a car almost essential unless we live close to a supermarket. And that's going to take time to change. But in the meantime, we could look at whether we can shop more locally so that we can walk or cycle instead of driving. I decided that I could actually get some panniers for my bike, and I thought long and hard about this. Was it better to buy some new equipment than to use the car? And when I looked at my use of the car, I decided yes, it would be preferable to get some bike panniers so I can do my shopping by taking my bike. And of course, that's not going to be possible for everybody. And we all have to find a balance in how we address these issues. It will take time for our society to change. But if we all do what we can, it will already start to make a difference. We may decide to change the pattern of what we eat. Many people have started to consume organic meat or milk, believing that this is less damaging to the environment and produces fewer greenhouse gases than conventional methods of farming. That's great in principle, but we need to continue to look deeply at these things and to look at not only how much carbon dioxide is being produced by the production and transport of these products. If they're being brought from the other side of the world, they may be organic, but if they're coming by air, then they're having quite a considerable impact on the carbon dioxide that's released into the atmosphere. So we need to look for locally produced foods. Then we have more chance of knowing how they're produced and how much carbon dioxide is being produced by transport, if any. Just because animals are living on an organic farm doesn't mean that they may not be suffering from bad conditions to live in or have diseases that are not being treated effectively. So again, we need to look carefully at what we're consuming. And it's another instance where actually looking for locally produced food enables us to keep more idea of how it's produced. We may, of course, decide to become vegan. Many people have done. But of course, that will involve using other products. We may start to use soy milk instead of dairy milk. But of course, soybeans won't grow in our climate, at least not on commercially viable level. And if they're grown in hotter climates, they require a lot of water to grow them. And then, of course, there's also the transport problem. So is there a more ecological alternative we can use? Of course, we are now getting oat milk appearing in our shops. Oats can be grown in the British Isles, and some of the brands are using British produced oats for oat milk. So there are changes that we can all make, and in making those changes we can learn a lot from other people and from resources that are available to us. There's a lot of really useful information available on the internet. Of course, there's also a lot of rubbish on the internet and we have to be discriminating about what we use. Gustav will talk later about the web pages that we've created for the Community of Interbeing website to help us to find ways to change and to consume in a more sustainable fashion. So we can learn a lot from other people, and if we support each other, Sangha can really help us as we make these changes. Of course, we may want to encourage others to change, as many people are at the moment. But of course, others will be more open to what we have to say if they can see that we're acting out the changes that we're advocating. As Mahatma Gandhi said, we must be the change we want to see. And when we're encouraging others to change, we need to act and speak mindfully to those around us. If we speak in angry or hostile terms, then the people we're trying to encourage to change will not want to hear what we want to say. I understand that George Monbiot, who's an environmental activist, he wrote a book called Feral. And in that book, he described sheep farming as introducing a white plague to the land. And he described sheep as woolly maggots. And this really offended sheep farmers, many of whom are quite environmentally aware. And as a result of that, in mid Wales, where George Monbiot lives, sheep farmers declined to get involved in a new initiative which was offering them quite a lot of money to change the way in which they farmed, to help to rewild the land. So we need to be very careful about how we speak to people who may not necessarily share our views, if we want them to hear, truly hear what we're saying, and to pay attention to it and to think about change. And this also applies to activists who are seeking to influence government. I think if we are activists, Sangha can be a great support. Our Sangha can remind us of one of Thai's mantras, am I sure, before we speak. And feeling supported helps us to have more empathy and understanding for the perspectives of other people. We hear quite a lot now about technology providing answers to climate change. But I think if we rely on technology to solve the problem of climate change, we haven't looked deeply enough at the problem. Technology may be able to help to limit the level of carbon dioxide in the air. But we have to remember that the driver of the problems associated with climate change are human behavior. And if we rely on technology and don't change the way in which we're living, technology itself will be unable to cope with the increasing amount of carbon dioxide that our consumption is liberating into the air. So I've talked a little bit about Sangha and how that can help us. But I think it's important, and I think this was the very first thing that I heard Thai say, that if our practice is to be sustainable, it needs to bring us happiness. We need to be able to maintain our happiness in the face of making those changes that I've talked about. And this is really important for our mental health. There's an American Dharma teacher, Rick Hanson, who has a very interesting phrase for the way in which the human mind works. He says that the human mind is Velcro for difficulties and Teflon for happiness. Human beings are great problem solvers. That's what's made us successful as a species, perhaps over-successful as a species. We don't let go of difficulties until we feel we've got an answer to them. So we tend to have be Teflon, be Velcro for difficulties. And we tend to let happiness slide away all too easily. So we need to think carefully about how we can nourish our seed of happiness, because really that is at the heart of enabling positive change to occur in the way we behave. Of course, the news media are full of all the negative things that are happening, all the problems that are not being solved, including those with climate change. We've heard that the Prime Minister and the King are not going to COP27 in Egypt. And it's easy to become caught in that negativity. So we need to find a balance in our lives of what we consume from the news media, from social media, from the internet. We need to minimize our contact with the negative. We still need to know what's happening in the world. But we also need to focus on positive changes that are happening in the world around us. And there are positive things that are happening. I live in Cambridgeshire, which has been described as an arable desert. Wildlife has a very hard time here. We live in a land of industrial farming. And I was very heartened a little while ago to go on a guided tour of a farm near Cambridge, which the RSPB, the Royal Society for Protection of Birds, bought about 20 years ago. And they were interested to explore changing the system of farming that was being used there to benefit wildlife. And really the changes that they've achieved are quite remarkable. They've stopped ploughing the land. They use cover crops to suppress weed growth. And they're directly drilling seeds for the next crop into the unploughed ground after the cover crops have died back. This has had an enormous result in terms of improving soil quality and reduced soil erosion, which is a big problem in much of Britain where arable farming is practiced. I see the river at the bottom of my road turning brown as soon as we have any rain, with soil that's being washed off the land into the water. The RSPB have also stopped using artificial fertilizers. They're composting straw with chicken manure and using that to fertilize the land. They've introduced innovative crop rotations to try and minimize the impact of insect pests. They're planting buckwheat with rapeseed to prevent cabbage flea beetle destroying the rape plants. And it's actually working remarkably well. They're cutting hedges only once in 3 years, not every year. And that's meant that hedges have become denser and has led to better nesting for birds and for other wildlife on the farm. The costs of the savings of herbicides and pesticides, together with the increased resulting environmental subsidies, have made the farm more profitable than their neighbours. And significantly, the RSPB have changed the name of the farm from Grange Farm to Hope Farm. Other farmers throughout East Anglia have started to follow the RSPB's lead. They're setting aside land for wildlife, rewilding areas that are not very productive. And other people are following that lead. My own village, Barrington, has started to rewild part of the village green. And individuals are doing the same with parts of their gardens. Our motivation for change in this way is not because we feel it's our duty or because we want to do good. These are still dualistic ways of thinking. We're changing our behaviour because we're beginning to see our deep connection with the earth. I have a friend, a Dharma teacher in Germany, who says that the question he asks himself when he encounters suffering is, what is the most loving thing to do here? I think that's the question that we all need to ask in our daily lives and in our relations with the earth. Thank you very much.